is Lauren Hollows, and welcome to the third video podcast from RTO Doctor. Today we are going to be covering Trainer and Assessor Currency, and this is one that we're covering because it is a very hot topic at the moment, particularly with auditors. It's something that tends to be focused on if you're doing a re-registration audit, extension to scope audit. So we're going to be very briefly covering some of the topics that are involved in that. We're going to try and keep it under 20 minutes today. So for those of you quickly that can't see this, don't stress out too much. What you can do is you can actually go online. You can either go online to rtodoctor.com.au, or you can go onto our YouTube channel and you can download the video show notes, and all the information in here is going to be contained in the video show notes. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about some of the requirements and how those requirements break down. Then we're going to talk about Trainer and Assessor Currency and competency. And then finally, what we're going to spend the majority of time focusing on is the industry currency and competency. And the reason why we're doing that is because that's obviously been the focus of audits, is making sure that there is industry currency and competency. And what we're going to do is just answer a couple of questions that I get asked quite often whenever I'm training on industry currency and competency, and also deal with some of the most most common complaints that I hear about having to maintain currency and competency as well. So starting out with the first one, obviously what we're dealing with is we're looking at the requirements, and those are the legislative requirements. So what we look at first is we look at the NSSC, and as of July 1st, 2013, the NSSC requirements updated to say basically that it was the TAE which was required in order to be able to participate in training or assessment. So if you are a trainer out there that has your TAA, or you're a manager and you know your staff only have the TAA, it's really important that you get them upgraded immediately to make sure that they meet that TAE requirements. Now this does go into a little bit more depth, and there are ways to demonstrate equivalency as well. If you're going to be looking at demonstrating equivalency, my recommendation to you basically is that you map out all of the units of competency within that TAE, and you make sure that you can meet every single one of those requirements. So it's almost as if you're undertaking a mini RPL, I guess would be how I would be putting it, but you've got to make sure that you've got all the skills that you would. Even then, it's generally only allowable within a certain time frame, and new trainers do still have some time to get their TAE. So if you're brand new to the industry, you do have time to get your TAE, but you're not allowed to assess during that period, and you still have to be under those supervisory arrangements for even the training component of it. So if you want to find out any more information about that, you can go on and just Google NSSC Trainer and Assessor requirements. But it is really important that you make sure that you've upgraded to that TAE as part of it. Okay. In addition to that, what you also want to be making sure is that you're meeting your training package requirements. And obviously the NSSC, what the part of that is not only that you have your TAE, but also that you have a qualification to the level or above that you are teaching. So for example, if you are teaching a Certificate 3 in Commercial Cookery, you need to have your Certificate 3 in Commercial Cookery or equivalent. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in a bit more detail, but definitely it's important to make sure that you've got that level of experience behind you. Okay, training packages is definitely the next area, and this is often an area that I find a lot of people miss. They're able to understand what the NSSC requirements that they've got to have, you know, their TAE, that they've got to have their you know, equivalent qualification, but what they don't often go on and do is go on and actually look at the training package requirements. So for example, if you are training in the construction training package, there are additional requirements that they do have for their assessors. So what they've got for the CPC 08 package at the moment is they say that you've got to have formal recognition of competency to at least the level being assessed, which meets in with those NSSC requirements. But also that you've got to have relevant industry experience, that is workplace experience within the last 2 years in the area being delivered. So that training package in particular is one where it does very clearly specify what period they expect that workplace experience to be in. The other thing that they also require in that training package is that you've got the relevant occupational registration or licensing requirements. So that obviously doesn't carry across all of the training packages, but for things like your RII, your CPCs, some of your security training packages and things like that, ICT, you need to make sure that you've got your relevant licensing qualifications and licensing requirements as well. That's fairly well standard across the sectors. So those are kind of the three areas. Now, I'm just quickly going to note that when you're looking at training packages, you are going to be looking at your qualifications within the new streamlined training packages. And as I have been promising for a while, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be releasing a video podcast on the streamlined training packages. But within the new streamlined training packages, even boiling down to the units of competency are becoming very explicit on what they are expecting in regards to competency of trainers. So if you're going through this process at the moment, you need to be making sure that you are keeping up to date with your streamlined training packages, because they will be very, very explicit as to what they expect to see within particular units, not across all units. Many of the units have just come out saying, look, as long as you're meeting your NSSC requirements, you're fine. But there are several units in particular that are coming out with fairly stringent requirements just to train that particular unit of competency. Okay, so the next section that we're going to deal with is trainer and assessor currency and competency. And as we've talked about before, obviously the first part of that is making sure that you've upgraded to your TAE. When we talk about trainer and assessor currency and competency, the first part that we'll obviously look at is just looking at the competency part. So generally this is not an issue, because I would say probably 99% of trainers would not look to demonstrate equivalence in this area. They would go straight to just having their TAE and making sure that they've got the full qualification. As part of that, as many people would already know, within the next year or so, everybody is going to be required to update to their LLN unit as well. That's going to be a new unit which is part of the TAE, focusing on language literacy and numeracy skills. So part of your maintaining your currency and your competency is going to be upgrading to make sure that you've got that statement of attainment or that unit within your qualification. If you're a trainer in this area, so you're a TAE trainer, there are additional requirements for you under the TAE 10 training package, and the requirements for those assessors is basically that you are very, very active in this arena, so that you're making sure that you're aware of what the latest practices in industry are, that you have a higher level in regards to the requirements and responsibilities, and that you have a very, very strong idea of things like, your reasonable adjustment, your inclusive practices, that you are maintaining a very, very high level of VET professional knowledge. Now, a lot of this will obviously play into the fact that when we look at the new AVQS system, which is supposedly due to come in around mid-year this year, is that the trainer and assessor currencies and competencies for trainers of trainers, so for TAE trainers, will actually move up just from having the TAE to actually requiring you to have your diploma, or actually I think it's the dual diploma, in order to be able to train trainers. So they had already built parts of that into the training package as it is at the moment, but definitely for somebody who is training in the TAE, you are going to be held to a higher standard when it comes to auditing in regards to what's expected for you maintaining your currency. Now, for trainers in general, there are a couple of things that I do really recommend in order for you to be maintaining your currency. And one of the first things that I would say is to make sure that you jump on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a really, really fantastic social media tool. There's some really good groups available for you to participate in if you're a trainer and assessor. They talk about best practice techniques, and there's a range of conversations which happen on there, from everything to how you phrase your instructions, to tips for dealing with specific high need groups, for specific issues within training packages when they come up, and how to deal with dealing with specific AQF level participants and qualifications, just a whole range of different areas. So if you are a trainer and assessor, then it is a really, really fantastic tool if you're not already on LinkedIn or perhaps if you're on LinkedIn but you're not really connected to into some of those groups, just go out. You can go onto LinkedIn and search for Trainer and Assessor or RTO Best Practice, and there's a range of really good groups that will come up. There's also a few for trainers in very specific areas. So for those that are training in high risk, there's a couple of groups that focus around high risk. There's another for LLN trainers, there's another for TAE trainers, and God knows how many others. So that's one of the first things that I would do, because that will just kind of keep you up to date with what some of the other trainers are finding, and it gives you a really good platform to get that external feedback that we talked about. The second part of it is I would strongly recommend that you are subscribed to your ISC, and that's your Industry Skills Council. The Industry Skills Council are all really fantastic. They all do at least a monthly newsletter. They will provide updates to when training packages are going to roll. They will provide updates to when there are major changes coming through your industries. And they will also give you opportunities to provide feedback when new training packages are coming through. And obviously at the moment, with all the new streamlined training packages coming through, there have been some really fantastic opportunities for consultation and for training of trainers and assessors. So there's even been some free training opportunities for anybody who was aware that the foundation skills training package came out. They did training all around the country for trainers and assessors, and that was free, so that you could understand, what the requirements were of those training packages and how you could utilize them across the whole range of training qualifications. So, doing simple things like that. I guess one of the concerns that we do see occasionally is that all of a trainer and assessor's currency is coming from internally within an organisation. And that can sometimes be particularly with some of the larger organisations. Often small organisations might not have the resources to be able to provide a lot of internal PD. But what we would definitely be looking for is that there's some sort of mix of internal and external PD that is being undertaken in order for you to maintain your trainer currency. Okay. So if you've kind of got the blend of those things, if you're making sure you're up to date with your TAE, then those ones are fairly easy to maintain. The last area that we're going to be talking about today is industry currency and competency. And as I'd alluded to earlier, this is definitely the area where we see the most problems for people. And it's generally in specific relation to the skills requirements. So again, if we're talking about breaking down a unit of competency, you've got your performance criteria, your required skills and knowledge, your critical aspects of assessment. Definitely when it comes to looking at the knowledge-based criteria for the unit, trainers and assessors will generally have sufficient evidence to be able to demonstrate that they're up to date with industry. So either they're subscribing to industry magazines, they're out talking to industry representatives, they're undertaking their consultation with industry, and they are keeping very well up to date with what the latest legislation is in those areas, and the theoretical knowledge about the latest technologies, for example, which might be available in those areas. So in regards to the knowledge components of the units, that's generally not where we see the problem. The issues that we often see brought up when we're talking about audits is when it comes down to actually practicing the skills. Okay, and this really probably goes to competency and currency. When you've got trainers who perhaps might have gotten their qualification 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, when your WHS units were not in there or were not as strong, when your when the communication requirements for units weren't as strong. Quite often now there's a sustainability unit within a qualification which wouldn't have been included if you'd undertaken it 5 or 10 years ago. So the qualifications themselves have obviously undertaken quite a lot of changes. But the most common complaint that I will often hear when I do this is that my industry itself hasn't changed. The core skills of doing a specific job, with the exception probably of anyone in the kind of technology area, that is what we hear. We hear, well, my industry hasn't changed. So the fact that I knew how to use a blowtorch 10 years ago means that I know how to use a blowtorch now. or that I knew how to use a hammer 10 years ago. Will I use a hammer the same way now? I guess what I would say to that is that there are very, very few industries that we are aware of that haven't changed in 5 or 10 years. And whether or not it's down to the technical skills, so yes, while the majority of the tools might be the same, there is generally a technological aspect which has been included now into the majority of qualifications. But the groups that you will be working with, the types of employees that are coming out of all of these sectors have changed quite dramatically because they've obviously changed along with society. So, the requirements for being able to communicate with employees and as an employee are different now. Obviously, the regulatory frameworks have changed significantly with the introduction of, WHS legislation, environmental legislation, those sorts of things. And the core groups that you are working with, so the students that you would have had 10 years ago, the strategies for dealing with those students, and the expectations in regards to work quality and things like that, and how the student will interact with that career are quite different. So, yes, there are definitely core skills which will remain across all industries. There are some core things about that industry that you will need to know that continue to be the same. But what we look at when we're talking about industry currency and competency was when the last time was that you actually did it. And that kind of takes us into the second complaint, which is, well, I do it in the, in the X all the time. So that might be I might do it in the training kitchen all the time, or I do it in the workshop all the time, or, I demonstrate this skill in the classroom all the time on our, on our realistic software, or even if they're on real software systems. So that's quite often, something that we will often hear, and reasonably so, because as part of teaching any qualification, you do have to demonstrate the skills to the students in order that they can pick it up, and you do have to demonstrate the knowledge in order for them to take that on. But there is a difference with doing it in those controlled environments in the workshops and the classrooms versus doing it for an employer in a real life scenario. Now, one of the biggest things where there's the difference is that there is somebody overseeing you when you're in a workplace. So the skills and things like that you are demonstrating, when you're demonstrating them in the classroom, you're basically demonstrating them to a group of people who have no idea whether or not it's correct or incorrect. So what we are looking for there is we're looking generally to make sure that at some point you're demonstrating these skills and getting some industry feedback on the skills that you're performing. So, if for example we were talking about a mechanical qualification, then one of the things that changes most consistently is the requirements for, the electronic testing in the cars, the requirements for example, the emissions that are allowed to be produced by cars. So what we would be looking for is participation in activities with industry where you're getting some validation and feedback that the techniques that you are practicing are the best practice for the industry. Because ideally, whenever you're teaching and you're training in any industry, you're teaching the best practice. So that's what students are picking up on. They're seeing best practice in its full effect. That then generally leads on to these 3 questions. And the first one is, well, does that mean I have to go back to industry every year? Do I have to take 2 weeks off work, go and find an employer who'll take me on, and go and do 2 weeks, of work experience? And no, the answer to that is definitely no. You're not required to do that every year. This one boils very, very much down to the qualification that you are teaching. It will boil down to the relationships that you have with employers. It will boil down to the delivery mode that you are working with, and a range of other issues. But generally what we would say is that there are probably a few skills that, what you would be looking to do is you would be looking to identify maybe, 2 or 3 units where you might be lacking a little bit, and either spend some time going out in industry, and develop the relationships with the employers who do those sorts of things really well. And if you need to spend some time just checking off that those skills can be incorporated. What we will often find with trainers who perhaps haven't actually gone out and worked in industry for a very long time, they will generally have really, really good relationships with their employers, with the employers that they work with and the students that they then put out into industry. What we will often do is we will negotiate with those employers to get them to come into the work into the work area or the workshop or things like that, and they can do a quick validation of the employee's skills. And obviously that's in a scenario where there is a time crunch and there is a lack of evidence within that particular area. It doesn't mean that the trainer is not able to do it. Basically what it boils down to is the fact that the evidence isn't there to support that skill has been undertaken in a recent period of time. And the recent period of time, as we might have talked about earlier, is that what we look for is we look for at a maximum of 2 years. Some training packages are explicit with that, but others aren't, and at RTO Doctor we would definitely say no more than 2 years, although ultimately it is up to the RTO to make that determination. That being said, if an RTO makes a determination and your auditor disagrees with it, it's probably your auditor is going to win that battle. So the second one is then, do I have to be assessed? And this is where we see a lot of mistakes being made, because what we then get is a whole bunch of internal upgrades that happen within the organization. So the moment a new unit comes out, another assessor from within your same organization, says, yep, okay, cool, you're up to date with that, and then ticks you off in it. That can cause a lot of problems at audit at times. So again, what we're looking for is we're looking for the industry validation that those skills are current. So if you need to get somebody to come in and validate your skills, we would strongly be recommending that you've got an industry representative coming in to sign you off on the skills, rather than another trainer or assessor within the organization. The last one then is do I have to upgrade? And look, to be honest, this is really a two-headed coin for me. No, you're not required to upgrade. Absolutely, you can demonstrate equivalency, and there are a lot of trainers, including myself, who train in units that you don't hold the most current unit in, and particularly over the last couple of years, because there have been so many training package upgrades in specific industry areas, it can be a really costly and time-consuming process to make sure. But on the flip side of that, if you are going to be coming up to an audit soon and you have the opportunity, it might be 6 months, 12 months down the track, you have the opportunity to go out and get an upgrade in that area, ideally from an organization outside of your own, then that can make it a lot easier for you at times. I don't like the idea of people just going out and getting RPL for the sake of getting RPL. And there's definitely a range of industry providers when it comes to RPL. So just because you've got a certificate that says RPL doesn't necessarily mean that an auditor is going to see that and then not want to see some sort of evidence of currency. In fact, we have seen audits quite recently where the participant or the trainer does have a certificate that they achieved recently in that area, and the auditor is actually called and still asked for that evidence of currency, and they've been unable to produce it because they weren't asked to produce it for the RPL. So it's a bit of a two-headed coin. So as an overview of industry currency and competency, and look, this one is a very, very difficult area because there's obviously so many different industries to cover. If you've got questions on this section for your specific area, I'm really happy for you to email those into me. But generally what you want to be looking at is you want to be looking at that you've got some sort of evidence that you are keeping current with the knowledge in that area. And as I said, that's a really easy one. So making sure you're subscribing to industry magazines, you're you're working with industry employers, you're making sure that you're going out and participating in the industry validation, moderation, that sort of thing. But also make sure that you are taking time to practice those skills in an industry relevant environment, that when you are practicing those skills in an industry relevant environment, that you're documenting that somehow. I definitely recommend the use of professional development journals or professional development registers. You might just be jotting down, what you've gone out onto a workshop that day, they've required you to perform a skill to demonstrate it for the students. The employer has signed off on that depending on obviously safety requirements. And just make sure that you're keeping a log of that. Professional development diaries or skills diaries and things like that have gone down well with a range of auditors that I have seen out in industry at the moment. But it's definitely something that you need to be making sure that you're keeping yourself current with, that you're breaking it down unit by unit. So if you train in 30 different units across 4 different qualifications, then make sure that you've got your trainer and assessor matrix covering every single one of those units, and that for each of those units you're looking at your skills and knowledge and making sure that you've got some sort of evidence for each of them. If you don't have evidence at the moment and perhaps you do have an audit coming up soon, then obviously that's a fantastic opportunity for you to be able to create your professional development training and plan for the year or for the next 6 months around that specific area. So as I've said, look, if you've got any questions on this area, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that do have questions on this area, please feel free to email me. It's lauren@rtodoctor.com.au. Normally when we train on this sort of thing, I do it over a period of about 4 hours. So breaking it down into such a short period of time does leave a lot of questions unanswered. But we will tackle this one in a little bit more detail in our next podcast as well, when we talk about the streamlined training packages and the trainer and assessor requirements for that as well. In the meantime, please feel free to download the show notes. If you have any questions, send them through to us, and I will see you next time. This is Lauren Hollows for RTO Doctor. You can find all of our information at www.rtodoctor.com.au, and you can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and